Okay, it's 12:02. We are now going to start this session. Welcome to today's event. I'm Ludivine Wolksik, the Executive Director of FACCNE, the French-American Chamber of Commerce for New England. We are part of a national network of 20 chambers representing 6,000 members all over the United States. Our main mission is to support French and American companies on both parts of the Atlantic. As Women's History Month recently ended in the United States, our session today is dedicated to gender equity. This event is part of a series called Diversity, Equity and Inclusion of the French-American Chamber of Commerce New England, organized with the support of FACC Atlanta, FACC Chicago, and the American Chamber in France. In the name of the French-American Chamber of Commerce of New England and our national network, I would like to thank again our sponsors for the series, Ipsen and EY. This series will run until June. Today, we are very honored to welcome exceptional women, leaders, all based in the Boston area. Tracey and Vanina represent the corporate world, and Marie represent a nonprofit organization supporting entrepreneurship. I'm very happy to welcome Sophie Koenig, the chair of FACCNE's Women in Business Network, who will be moderating this session. And Sophie, I will turn it on to you to introduce our presenters. Thank you.
Merci Ludivine. Hello all. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. My name is Sophie Koenig-Rodriguez. I'm the chair of FACCNE's Women in Business Network, FWBN, which I founded in 2014. Our pro bono community aims to empower multicultural women, not just French women, multicultural women in the US workplace with workshops, conversations, and connections. You can learn more on FACCNE.org. Today, we're going to discuss how to remove barriers to gender equity in the corporate world and in the entrepreneurship environment. We will reserve a bit of time at the end for Q&A. So you can also don't forget or don't hesitate to write us some questions. In the interest of time, I'm just going to briefly introduce our panelists. You should have received their full bios in the invitation. So let's start with Tracey Flaherty. Thank you for being here. Senior VP and Global Head of Corporate Social Responsibility and Public Affairs at Natixis Investment Managers. Hi, Tracey. Vanina Laurent-Ledru, Vice President and Head of Global Public Affairs at Sanofi Genzyme and co-founder of Boston Booster. Hi, Vanina. And Marie Meslin, President and Executive Director of the Capital Network. Hi, Marie. I'm actually very happy to moderate this panel because 4 years ago, I moderated a very similar conversation at Wesley College with several innovators, C-levels, professors, and researchers more in the public policy. But that conversation was on gender equality. So I'm actually very happy to now discuss equity. So why don't we start with briefly defining equity? What is it? I like this particular definition from Amelia Ransom. She's the Senior Director of Engagement and Diversity in a company called Avalara, that provides service provider for tax software. She says, equity is providing the same meal full of meat for everybody, knowing that you have vegans and vegetarians in the group. So equity, on the other hand, attempts to identify the specific needs and requirements informed by demographic traits such as ethnicity, nationality, age, gender, etc. And then it tries to address the different needs of each group by bridging the gap between minority and majority groups. So this makes equity central to the genuine empowerment of minority groups. And it's not just theoretical equality. So that's the difference. So let's continue with Amelia Ransom's example. She says, equity is providing vegan and vegetarian options along with the meat meal so that everybody has something that they can eat. So next, let's review very quickly what traditional barriers to GE have been, gender equity. One, definitely workplace culture, lack of representation of female leaders, lack of flexible work practices, lack of mentors. Definitely social expectation regarding gender roles, gender stereotypes, sexism, and also affordability and accessibility of childcare. So let me just provide one quick data point on that for a frame of reference for everybody joining from France. If you were to put two children, say 2 years old and 4 years old, in crèche or maternelle from say 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., donc 9h, 5h, pas très long comme journée, 9 to 5, it would cost you in the Boston area anywhere from $4,000 to $5,200 a month. So yeah, $4,600 on average per month to get your kids in crèche or maternelle. That's a very interesting data point that, again, for a frame of reference for our people in France. So let's start with topic number one, gender equity in the corporate world. I'm going to set the scene quickly before COVID. Let me quote. So all this data that I'm going to be referring to comes from a really good study that McKinsey Women in the Workplace and Linen Foundation just published a few months ago. It's quite recent. A lot of my numbers come from that. I invite you to go check them. Really, really good data. So I quote, at the beginning of 2020, the representation of women in the work and in corporate America was trending in the right direction. This was most pronounced in senior management between January 2015 and January 2021. Representation of women in senior vice president position grew from 23 to 28%. Representation in the C-suite grew from 17 to 21%. Of course, women represented dramatically, women remain dramatically underrepresented, particularly women of color. Even pre-COVID, only 1 in 5 direct report to CEO was a woman, and only 1 in 30 women of color reported to CEO directly. But the number they were improving. It was slow, but they were improving. So for the last, for 6 years in a row, women continue to lose ground in the first step of managerial role. For every 100 men promoted to manager, only 85 women would be promoted. And this gap was even larger for Black women and Latinas. Only 58 Black women for every 100 men, only 71 Latinas for every 100 men. So as a result, women remain significantly outnumbered in entry-level management at the beginning of 2020. They were only holding 38% of manager-level positions. And then COVID happened. So in February 2021, these numbers are fairly recent. This is solid data. In February 2021, it was reported that in the last 12 months, almost 3 million American women lost their job. They were forced out of the labor force due to coronavirus-induced exodus. That reflected persistent pay inequality, undervalued work, antiquated notion of caregiving. In addition, and this is where this is very specific to this conversation, this first topic we're going to talk about. According to that Women in the Workplace study, along with McKinsey and Linen, it is believed now that 1 in 3 women are considering leaving the workplace or downshifting their careers. So that's as many as 2 million women who could leave corporate America in the next few weeks and months. So not only you have this problem having that pool that has been shrinking for years or that was not growing, but now the ones that have stepped up are considering leaving. So we can see that definitely the pandemic has caused a whole series of problems, and especially the 3 main parts of impact impacted women that are overworking themselves to manage existing commitment. They're withdrawing from opportunity because they have to maintain work-life balance, or they're simply leaving the organization. So after all this data, thank you for your patience, setting the scene. After all this data, I'm finally going to go into my first set of questions. And I would think this first set of questions goes more to Tracey and Vanina, really in the corporate environment. Ladies, I'd like to know, in your organization, can you tell us what specific programs are in place? One, to prevent that exodus that we're told is coming, 2 million corporate women leaving. What do we do to retain these managers and the future leaders of tomorrow? What do we do to recruit, train, and promote women? How does your company work with that first level of management, that pool? How do we step to that? Because that's the entry. How do you support working moms? What measures do you have in place? How do you do it? So Tracey, if you want to take that and then pass it on to Vanina, I'm just going to be listening from now on. Thank you.
Get off mute here. Thank you, Sophie, and thank you to FACCNE for including us today. I guess I would start, I think my first answer would be flexible working arrangements. And I think if there is any positive that comes out of COVID, it's the fact that companies have seen that flexible arrangements work, working from home works. And I think there were in previous years a lot of informal flexible working arrangements. And I think now everybody is looking for some kind of flexibility from the workplace. And I think that has really created an opportunity for many, not just women, to maybe craft a schedule, create a schedule that might have been a little different prior to COVID. And I think there's still an enormous amount of challenges with schools not being open, camps possibly being closed. So that's another issue. But I think in terms of the corporate world, I think more of a positive around flexible working is a good thing for everybody. And what we found from analysis is a lot of the younger workers have wanted that all along. So it's not just women who need it because of childcare arrangements, but it's also this younger generation of workers, employees that really are demanding more of these benefits. I think the other thing I would say, and then I'll pass it to Vanya, is mentoring. I think during COVID, we have a very robust employee resource group network. And those employee resource groups have never been more important than they were during the pandemic, all the groups. But I think with women, it's nice to be able to talk to somebody who's been in your situation, who knows what it's like to talk to a boss for the first time and say, you know what, I can't be on that meeting at 4 o'clock because I have to go pick up my child from school. Those are tough conversations sometimes. And it's important that women, all groups actually, have somebody like them that they can talk about these things with, that go beyond the work and into your personal life. And so I think it's important for the employee resource groups that we have to really provide that source of community for our employees.
Thanks, Tracey. And I could not agree more on the very practical solutions you've just offered. But I'd like to take a step back. Sophie, you shared with us a bunch of data. I just want to add one more very striking figure. The World Economic Forum just published their gender gap report, and you are so right. After COVID, we are now seeing that it will take an extra generation of women to reach gender parity. So instead of 100 years, we're now at 136 years, and it just magnifies the issue for me. And Tracey and I represent, corporate America, if you wish, but the issue is so real all across sectors. And what we can share here, hopefully, can also be helpful for some of the people in the audience to apply to, whichever sector you are in, because this is really something that I think all ladies on the panel are very passionate about. And we want to make sure we can offer practical tools. So with this, maybe I'll give you a quick snapshot of what's happening in the healthcare sector. So I work for this company, Sanofi, and it is very, almost sad to know that women only make up 10% of the management committees of large companies and only 16% of top management. And for us, this imbalance is simply inconsistent with our primary mission of providing care for everybody, especially since women happen to be the chief medical officers to so many, right? To their children, to their parents, to other relatives. We know that in the US, but it's also true in Europe, women make up to 80% of the healthcare decisions for the families. So with this, Sanofi decided to act and really say, this is no longer good to wait. We are going to put very specific KPIs, and the company's taken a commitment to reach 50-50% gender balance among our top 2,000 leaders by 2025. Our executive committee members are also measured on the degree of inclusion and diversity in the business. And of course, we are also implementing a series of measures on which I will come afterwards. But to give you a practical example, today in the US, we have 5 business units for Sanofi Genzyme, the company I represent, and the 5 heads of these business units happen to be women. So I think it's really been a great progress. But of course, the idea is to create equity, not just position women where they need to be. And with this, I'll just perhaps close this kind of opening statement to say that in my mind, creating awareness on top of what Tracey said is critical. I saw a question on the chat. Flexible working arrangement is fundamental for everybody in the family. But what is very important is also to create the awareness of why you need flexibility at work and why you need gender partnership. So Sanofi has been creating this program called Men Advocating Real Change, MARC. And this is a program that is done in partnership with Catalyst, whereby it's specifically focusing on male, trying to create allyship, trying to really ensure that men also are made aware of the unconscious bias that we all have, and ensure that ultimately it's not only about mentoring women, and we can discuss this a little bit later afterwards, but it's also about creating true partnerships across the company. And again, I'd love to come back with some specific deliverables from this, but so far we have more than 400 people that have participated in that.
I would just add that the other group of stakeholders that are really in our business, financial services, our clients are really demanding that we as financial service companies hold ourselves to a higher standard as it relates to diversity and inclusion, and not just gender equity, but racial equity as well. And our government officials that certainly have a say in our highly regulated business are also asking a lot of questions around how we think about diversity and inclusion. And not just the diversity question, how many do you have, but the inclusion piece, which is what is your culture like, and does it create a situation where it helps you to manage the risk of your business. So those are both areas that we continue to see new stakeholders having a say in how we create programs, compensate our managers, and incentivize the right behavior.
Can I just add something to that? I think that's really important what you said, Tracey, especially when it comes to that word inclusion. And I think, oftentimes DEI is lacking. So you have diversity, equity, and inclusion. The word that's missing is belonging, right? It's not enough to include somebody if the structure hasn't been set up to give them a sense of belonging. So, just taking the box of certain hires isn't going to create a space and a culture that is welcoming and that helps them thrive. And I think that is a really big thing that we just don't think enough about, right? We think about, let's change our hiring practices, but we don't think about what happens when people get here, right? What's the structure? What's the support system? And I think that's where we have to start being a little bit more innovative in how we think, including, this idea of culture and culture fit. I think culture fit is a terrible idea. Like, culture is not something that is static, that you come in and fit into. It's something you collectively create. So what you're looking for is people who are going to add to it, who are going to elevate it, who are going to kind of bring a different perspective. And I think reshifting some of the old frameworks that we have and asking ourselves, how we can push those and how we can, how we can think about these things differently rather than, try and infiltrate people in a structure that hasn't shifted, right? I think we really have to ask ourselves these questions. And the idea of culture fit versus culture add is one of those big ideas that I think we need to focus a little bit more on.
And Malcolm Forbes said, diversity is the act of thinking together. It's a quote that is making the rounds in, for all of us working on diversity inclusion. And I think it is so true in terms of how we need to push the boundaries of what was commonly accepted in terms of, okay, if we bring people to the table, then the magic will happen and that will be it. And so Sanofi, but so many other companies are also working on challenging our own bias. And there are workshops that are being organized. Now it's kind of compulsory for everybody to go through that. And every time you do it, because it's not just good to do it one time, you realize how many hidden biases we all have. And just making sure that people are aware of this and then can actually challenge inclusion and create that belonging that you were talking about is so important. So I think that is indeed kind of the new frontier in diversity and inclusion, and it's going to be very important.
And I just would also add, oh, sorry, Marie, do you want to go?
Just quickly, yeah, I think that's where really hiring the right people to help you with that is critical. So I think a lot of times companies try to do it internally and have their own processes and don't ask. Quite frankly, they just don't ask their founders of color, their women, their, everybody who's kind of, who is impacted by this. And they create just a structure based on reports and data and all of that. And they lose the kind of what is essential here is, gathering the data from the people that you're trying to serve.
I would just add that I think the role of managers in an organization has never been more important, because so much of this, you can certainly have your top-down leaders saying all the right things, but if your employees aren't feeling it consistently from their managers, and if we aren't as a firm really recognizing the managers who are doing the great work on inclusive leadership and talking to the ones that aren't, it falls apart. We all have decentralized organizations, particularly with this remote working environment we're in, and it's critical that managers really walk the talk at all levels of an organization as it relates to these programs. And I think when you look at some of the data, that's where the hard work is, because it falls apart. You have the CEO saying all the right things, you have the head of DE&I saying all the right things, but then 3 or 4 layers into the organization, and the average employee isn't feeling that kind of urgency and that kind of importance. So I think we need to put systems in place that really reward the great managers who are creating the culture, the inclusive environments, and providing that great working environment for all of our employees.
And here, Tracey, and if you allow me, Sophie, I'd like to be a little bit contentious, not just for the sake of the argument, but also, again, for everybody in the audience to truly understand that this point can come home. It is about rewarding managers, and it is about rewarding good behaviors, and it is not so much about mentoring women. I think it is the era of mentoring women should almost be over in my mind, if you don't mind me saying, because women happen to be over-mentored and under-sponsored. And what we need are more sponsors in the organizations, more people that can be in the rooms where women may not typically be or not yet be, and that can actually speak passionately about diversity, inclusion, that sense of belonging, and what we've just been commenting upon, and not creating and adding layer after layer of women to, let's develop your strategic mindset, because it so happened that women always lack a strategic mindset in one meeting or another. Define it however you want, or let's make sure we're going to work on your gravitas, or all those things. It's just different in terms of presentation sometimes, and that's okay, and that's what we should be working on. So sorry for my passionate speech here, but I am seeing so many of these programs still piling up and actually not necessarily meeting their goals, and that's something I would encourage the audience to think about.
Well, yeah. And clearly we have to do something, because we can't wait 135 years. I think yes. that is not acceptable.
Yeah, and I think it also, and this is where I think some of the differences between the world that I operate in, which is supporting early stage founders and early stage entrepreneurs who lack access to social and inspirational capital. So for us, the mentorship portion is key, because actually a lot of these women who are starting businesses for the first time, even if they've been in the corporate world and starting something else, actually lack that kind of support and championship and that kind of mentoring. So for us, it is still critical, but I think you're right, Vanina, in the sense that there's a lot of attention on fixing women, and there's not enough attention on fixing the structure. right? Like how people ask questions, why they ask the questions. And we're expecting women to have the tools to combat that at every turn, but that only changes their own situation, doesn't change the structure. So we kind of have to think beyond just fixing women.
Absolutely.
So I hate to interrupt this conversation because I could listen to you three forever. I love it. There's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing to fix. Fix the structure, not the women. Thank you. Let's move on to my next question. Is there a difference between the US and the French entities? Maybe this question is definitely for Tracey, I would think. Are the laws on parity working?
So there are some differences. So I think overall, gender is one of the only things globally that you can actually measure. So one of the challenges we have in this space is that you are not able to measure race and ethnicity and some of the other disability you can, but some of the other underrepresented groups are much harder to get a handle on, in your organization, both in terms of how many people you have of that group, what the opportunity is, but gender is one that it seems pretty clear that you can measure gender globally. In France and in many European countries, there are more, the government is more involved in creating a safety net for women workers, like childcare, but also in providing some incentives for women, for you to advance women in your organization, whether it's board representation or senior leadership. But I think the other thing I would say in France is that we do find too that there is a level of privacy as well, that our European employees really are not quite as open to sharing some of the things that our US employees are very comfortable sharing. So it's really a mix of cultural differences, but I would say that we are proud we have a lot of very senior women in our France office, and all over Europe in very senior business roles. And I think we'll continue to see more and more of that. There's a very active women's network there that is well represented by senior women. And there is a lot of sponsorship, I would say. The senior women who are in positions are very comfortable sponsoring other women and bringing them along. So it's very nice to see. And that's something that we like to see all over in all of our offices.
And Sophie, perhaps I can comment on this, being French myself, having founded a women's empowerment network in France at the time, because the issue was, and is still, unfortunately, quite present in companies. I just want to say again, another striking data point, gender equity and equality is definitely a priority for the French government. But yet again, French women have been working for free since the 4th of November 2020. So for the year 2020, they basically stopped being paid on the 4th of November because of this famous pay gap. It's great that the government's been working on this new gender equality index. It is, I think, fair to say that quotas have been working for inclusion in women in boards. But I think the next step now is more to look into executive committees, where really the strategy is also being designed and where women are not that present in France. It's quite interesting. So the way that data is actually being collected by the government, Tracey, as opposed to private companies, is both an opportunity and a challenge, of course. But I think we should really try to work in kind of a public-private partnership to turn it into a bigger opportunity. Because again, there is this very strong willingness to change the status quo. There are data that they are measuring for all of the companies listed on the French stock exchange. So at least starting from those big companies can have a ripple effect on the rest of the French companies and the rest of the SMEs, which really are still finding it very hard to apply some of these findings. So that hopefully it is going in the right direction.
Okay, excellent. So I have to interrupt the conversation in the corporate world. We're now going to move on to the entrepreneurship world. This would be our topic number 2 for today. Just as we did for the first topic, I need to kind of set the scene for the second topic, gender equity. entrepreneurship and innovation. What is an entrepreneur today? So the traditional definition of an entrepreneur really was you have an entrepreneur, you have a capital, you make products, you have customers, boom, you're in business. So you'd start out with a customer problem or need that you want to solve, you get your capital, you make your product, you market it, you win your customers, that's it, you're done. So as of 2017, there were more than 11 million US businesses owned by women, and they were employing over 9 million people. They were generating $1.7 trillion in sales. That data point is from the National Association of Women Business Owners. And 5.4 million of these companies were majorly owned by women of color in the US. These firms employed 2.1 million people and generated 361 billion in revenue annually. That's different data point. This one is from American Express Open, the state of women-owned businesses in 2019. So now a more current definition, if I may, about entrepreneur, because what's an entrepreneur today? Everybody says, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. So what does that mean? It's kind of like more of someone who's profitably solving a problem. An entrepreneur today is also somebody who starts a side hustle and eventually will create a full-time sustainable business with employees. And that definition actually includes freelancers, which leads me to my next data point. This just came out January 20th, so this is fresh data. It is projected that in 2027, 86.5 million people will be freelancing in the US. That will make up 51% of total US workforce. Let me repeat that. In 2027, there'll be more freelancers than traditional employees. So for the purpose of this one conversation, we're kind of including all the definitions of entrepreneur. And my next question, of course, goes to Marie. But Vanina and Tracey, if you want to chime in later on, please feel free to do so. Marie, you have the next 10, 12 minutes. I'd like for you to tell us what are the barriers for women to launch and sustain their own business? How is your organization helping remove these barriers? Has COVID had any impact on your programs and the female business owners that you serve? So let's start with that. Go ahead, Marie.
Sure, yeah. So I run the Capital Network. We're a nonprofit based out in Boston. And what we do is we focus on fundraising. So we help entrepreneurs understand kind of their first outside capital options. And that can be anything from crowdfunding to government grants to angel or VC money to bank debt to whatever it is, right? So we are trying to help entrepreneurs understand where they're at, what they need, how to get there, and how to create a network of people who can support them along the way. So what we mostly deal with isn't people who are going to be opening restaurants or who are going to be open, like what's traditionally called like small businesses. We deal mostly with people who are creating businesses that tend to be a little more high growth. And so from that vein, one of the main barriers that we see women face is, and I mentioned it briefly earlier, is the access to social capital. So people, a support system, experts, mentors, champions, and that can actually include also other entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneurship is a really lonely path, right? You are working on your thing. You're probably doing it alone at the beginning. You're doing it after hours of possibly your regular job, along managing kids. Like it's a really kind of intense and can be a very lonely endeavor. So when we're talking about social capital, it's not just the experts and the mentors, but it is also other entrepreneurs, right? You need to be surrounded with other people who can support you and you can bounce ideas off and can create kind of a safety net and a support system that helps you stay motivated, kind of create deadlines for yourself, have other people who can hold you accountable. Like all of those things help you kind of continue on this journey, which is, significantly difficult. So that's one of them. That's the social capital. Inspirational capital. And what we mean by that is, we talked about it a little bit, like very briefly, is if you don't see yourself represented, it's really hard. It can be really hard to imagine yourself there. right? So you need to be exposed to other women of color, other people in the LGBTQ community. Like there's a reason why, it's so important to see women in positions of power. And it's not just to hopefully have those women kind of create a more inclusive structure and network, but it's also to help, the younger generation, girls, who can now say, I can be vice president, right? Kamala Harris can do it. I can do it too. So having that inspirational capital there is also really important. And then the lack is, not surprisingly, capital, right? Money. You need money to create a business. Now, hopefully that money comes from whatever sales you're making. Hopefully you don't have to take any outside money. Like that's always what I personally recommend. If you don't have to take any outside money, do that. That's the best path. But that's not true of all businesses. Some businesses do need an influx of cash to take them to the next level, to do all the taste tests, to do all the customer journeys, to do all the whatever it is that you need to do to get there. So capital is a really problematic one because women tend to have less access to capital. And we know, there's some very serious data around, especially the VC world, about how little women get access to capital. It's, I think it went down to in COVID. So it was 10%. I think now it's at like 7 or 8%. Of amount of women who get capital. If you're talking about women of color, the number is so statistically small that it doesn't even show up, right? So there's a serious problem with who gets money. It won't be surprising to you that the people who mostly, and actually it's 78% of people who work in the VC field are white men. Now, there has been some talk about more women coming into the VC world, but they're not decision makers. They're associates. They're community people, they're marketing women, right? So that's all great, but they don't have a voice in saying, where does the money go? How do we allocate this, right? So there's this whole structural issue with who gets access to money and who gives money. So one of the things that we do is we actually are open to anyone and all entrepreneurs, but in 2016, we did create a fellowship for female founders specifically to address that. So to support women who actually are looking to raise money. So this is for women who have a business that does need an influx of cash and who are considered a bit more high growth, to support them in not just the education portion, which we mentioned, right? So you also need to understand what the structure is, how it works, so you can make the right decisions for yourself, right? You can't just assume if everybody thinks that like unicorns get VC money, like if you have a startup, you are extremely unlikely to get capital, period, right? Like most startups fail. So we know that. So then how do you start understanding the structure and the system to be able to make the right decisions for yourself and not just bang your head against a brick wall, right? So that's one of the things we do. So we want to educate people about, all of their options and the structure and what investors are thinking and, what are some things you can prepare and what the documents you need and all of those things. So that's one thing, that's the education portion. The second thing is mentorship, again, because you need people who can help you think about your business differently, who can help you, to Vanina's point, who can help champion you. Why do they believe in you? Why do they believe in your business? Like that's actually a really important part of that people want to see is as an entrepreneur, especially for investors, you want to see entrepreneurs be able to bring in high caliber people, right? People who are experienced, people who believe in you, who can push you, who can guide you, all of those things. So that's the mentorship portion. And then widening your network again. So that's more on the social capital, right? Most people, if you're a business that needs investor support, if you need investor money, or even if you need government grant money, most people don't know somebody who understands that world, right? It's a notoriously secluded kind of group of people, high net worth individuals who you're not casually going to meet at a cafe or anywhere like that, right? So how do you access those people? And that's part of the things that we do. So we open that group of investors up and kind of create opportunities, like authentic and I would say more casual opportunities for them to meet. Because I think, I'm certainly not somebody who is always looking to be a public speaker, right? And so you need to create an environment where people can get to know each other and can have actual relationships and create an actual bond not in a pitching sense, but really on a human level. So that's one of the things that we work on as well.
And Mary, everything you said, there are so many parallels with large corporations. I believe that we should also look into intrapreneurship. I know, Sophie, that was not necessarily one of the topics we wanted to look into, but women happen to be change agents. Everybody that actually doesn't exactly fit the bill is much more likely to be a change agent for companies, and we need those to actually evolve to the standards of society to ensure that we are representative, that you understand the needs of your patients, customers, and so on. And I truly believe that there are very good lessons learned from what the Capital Network and other not-for-profits are doing. So very, very inspiring.
Excellent. So let's move on to more of the gig economy definition of what a freelancer and what a new entrepreneur is now. Because looking at the weight that they're going to have in the economy in the next few years, I'd like to know if your organization has a specific plan to create equity by means of contracting maybe more women-owned businesses.
I can start. I mean, we were certainly looking at our supply chain for all underrepresented groups, not just women, but people of color as well. So, and we're taking a look at our supply chain and trying to better understand, first of all, who we have as vendors today and partners, and how can we expand that. So it's work that's ongoing. There's some great resources in the Boston area. The Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, for example, also has some ways to identify vendors and partners that will fit the bill as well. So we are actively taking a look at that.
Vanina and Marie?
Yeah, I think on our side, what we've been working more on top of the addressing the procurement chain has been really what can we do for women, then what can we do on work-life balance? Because ultimately, the real question, as Tracey said at the very beginning, is how do you ensure you can bring maximal flexibility while ensuring, of course, the business gets done? And perhaps I'll take you outside the US and outside Europe here to say that the company's been working on global guidelines to help we can have flexible working, but that we can also ensure that we have a broadened definition of the family. So for instance, in Japan, it's very interesting to see that you need a much broader definition of who counts as family, because if you really want to allow women to work, you need not only to list their spouse, but you also need to list their grandparents, you need to list potential other siblings, potential people that will be, I don't know, stepchildren, aunts, uncles, and so on, that will also be able to take care of kids. And that is very important just to understand the country you're operating in and stay true to the goal, which is, again, work-life environment that is inclusive for all.
I couldn't agree more. I think the local aspect of this is incredibly important. You know, you need the feedback from employees in these regions to tell you what works for them. So while you can certainly have a framework that's global or even national for that matter, you do need to really understand your employees in the region and make sure that you are, back to inclusion and culture, making sure that you're creating an environment and a series of activities and benefits and programs that really work for them. And it's very different, you know, as you go around the world.
And I think part of the things we talked about earlier too is, you know, there's a lot of things that are being looked at that are still within the existing structure. So one of the big themes I think we, again, have to ask ourselves is, you know, what are we calling productivity? What does productivity mean? Right? How are we defining it? Because I think, again, we're still slightly shifting definitions that have existed since whatever the 40s and 50s about what it is, what productivity is. Productivity is showing up, clocking in, clocking out, being able to prove how many hours you've put on something, being able to, you know, correlate billable to non-billable to all of those things. And I think now's the time to really look at what productivity means. I used to work for an innovation consultancy company. And something as simple as, you know, they would provide sabbaticals. for employees who've been there for a certain amount of time, with the idea that like actually getting those employees away from the company for 3 months with no agenda, with really having them focus on, you know, who they are as people, learnings, traveling, whatever it might be, all of that will refer back, when they come back, will infuse a different kind of productivity and innovation and different thinking that will make the company even more successful. And I think America in general has a very difficult time understanding productivities in non-physical ways. And that's, I think, something that you know, we need to think of. The other thing we need to also realize is, and I think, you know, hopefully now employers will be a little bit more flexible with that, is mental health, right? We need actual structural support for mental health. And that is, I think, especially important for women who are balancing a whole region and other responsibilities that are not acknowledged, that are not supported. And so having a recognition of what mental health, and the fact that mental health is just as important as physical health, if not potentially, you know, more, is paramount to ensuring that, you know, we create spaces that are truly supportive.
And just this year, sorry, Vanina, we created our first employee resource group to focus on mental health. So we have a group of employees, actually it was a man who runs one of our, is this very senior guy whose family had some mental health issues this year. And so he has brought together a group of employees to really, again, be in a safe space to talk about what resources they need, and to have a community to talk about it. And in addition, like many companies, you know, we've started to offer, we had meditation, I think meditation Mondays, and, you know, really encouraging people to take some time off, put the phone down, and really spend some time really focusing on things other than work, because we know people are really at a burnout stage right now based on what they've been through in the last year.
And I was about to say, I slightly disagree with you, Mary. Of course, women are somehow bearing the brunt of household chores still, but I think mental health is very much of a men's issue as well, because perhaps we speak less of it for men, and it's deeper, it's very down. But again, in our company, we've seen that it unfortunately, mental health doesn't have a gender.
Oh, of course.
COVID's been impacting everybody, irrespective of their gender. And I would almost say it's up to us women to support our spouses even more than before, to maintain balance at home. It's a joke, but it's to say that it's really been taking a toll on everybody. And to that end, one thing that I think we should all be looking into is, and I saw there was a question in the chat about travel. I think that is indeed the next big thing that we will need to address. It will, I don't expect companies will go back to travel schedules the way they were before the pandemic. First, for probably cost issues, but second, because it simply no longer makes sense. We've seen that we can accomplish so much, like today, having this conversation by Zoom, never having met one another, and yet I feel that I'm getting a lot of insight. So you can replace so many things by Zoom. And yeah, I will definitely advocate for that.
Excellent. So let's move on now. Thank you all for, again, all this experience that you're sharing with us. I'd like to get a little bit personal, if I may. We have a little bit of time. So as a working mom, as a woman, what's your biggest challenge and how do you address that?
So, who do you want to start, Sophie?
Yeah. You want to go? You want to take it?
I can go then. So working mom, 2 kids, you know, my biggest challenge actually has been how do I recharge my energy and not let this crazy situation drive me, my husband, one of the kids, you know, working from home because school has not ever reopened. And that's what led me to co-found Boston Boost Her, this new network we say it's to help women ignite their own spark. And basically the idea behind Boston Booster is really to say we all have things that we can contribute to a better society. We are focusing on social innovation projects and really creating bonds between members, allowing them to support one another to achieve better work-life balance, but also learn new concepts, new ideas, and And I think there could be an interesting connection with the Capital Network now that I know more about it, Mary. But it's very, for me, it's been very important to have a place to keep learning, to keep, refueling. So that's really been it.
Okay, let's move on to Tracey. 30 seconds.
As a working mom, I would say probably really trying to not feel guilty. I think that, I think men do too, but, I love my work. I enjoy traveling. I enjoy learning new things. I have a great career that I'm proud of, and that means I am not always around, and then I have to delegate sometimes. And so I think trying to get more comfortable with that, be there when I can be, and when I'm there, be completely present, but trying to really manage not feeling guilty, I would say is the biggest constant challenge.
Excellent. Marie?
So I'm not going to go the challenge route. I'm going to go with, just to change the dynamic, I'm going to go with what I'm most proud of. And that is that my children see me at work and they see what I do. They hear what I talk about, some of the topics that I'm really, I want them to listen to, especially when we're talking about women, when we're talking about different groups and kind of some of the work that I do. So for me, it's felt really validating to have my kids ask me questions about what I do and get a better understanding of who I am as someone who's leading a nonprofit.
Okay, excellent. What tangible action would you recommend our audience take today? Let's start with Vanina.
We can all be drops, making bigger that lead to an ocean. So join a women's or a DE&I network, whichever you see fit. Start educating yourself on the role of bias in your own organization and beyond. And again, whether you're a man or woman, support